I know I'm a little late on this one, considering this show first aired last Friday, August 8th. But yeah, I just finished watching the premiere episode for the new Cinemax series, The Knick. Now, I was interested in this for a couple of reasons. Clive Owen is awesome. I'm just gonna put that out there. Clive Owen is just freaking awesome. Um, B, I was interested in the premise, and C, Steven Soderbergh. How can you go wrong with Steven Soderbergh as the director and creator of the series? So this particular show revolves around. It takes place in New York City in the year 1900, and it focuses on this hospital called the Knickerbocker. I believe that's what it's called. And the main character is Dr. Thackeray, played by Clive Owen. And his primary goal is obviously to save lives. I mean, he's after his friend and colleague commits suicide after failing to save a woman and her baby during a surgery. Thackeray is promoted to the chief of surgery. I believe he's basically the new big boss of the hospital. So, although he still has to answer to a few superiors, not the point. Now, in addition to having to deal with the death of his colleague and having to deal with the fact that he and his staff don't always see eye to eye, or at least they're not always on the same page in terms of what to do about this problem and this problem, blah blah blah. But also, he is forced to hire a new African American deputy surgeon named Dr. Edwards. Now it's not that Thackeray himself is quote unquote racist. He just, with the hospital's financial problems and everything going on, and the fact that he doesn't really know this Dr. Edwards, despite the fact that he has some impressive qualifications. He just doesn't want to break in anyone new in the staff. He doesn't really want to draw any unwanted attention in this time when the hospital needs more money, more finances. I mean, they're in a huge deficit right now. And also, he thinks this African American surgeon will scare off the patients. So he has reasons. There is a method to his madness, as indicated by the episode title. Soon, however, Edwards refuses to resign, and he discovers that there's also a method to Thackeray's madness, and we have the setting for our show. Now, first of all, the acting is pretty top notch. I mean, Clive Owen obviously makes for a good leading man. I mean, he's very powerful in his speeches. He's very good at the cynical side of this Thackeray character, and he plays off the supporting cast quite well, and they play off him quite well. I can't really think of a bad performance per se. Really, the only problem that I have with the multitude of characters isn't really the acting. The acting is very good, but I think the show may throw a little bit too much at you right out of the gate. By the end of the episode, I was able to gauge, okay, this is what this character does, this is who this character is, blah blah blah. But we couldn't really get too deep into any of them, which, I guess that's to be expected from a pilot episode or a premiere episode. So yeah, the acting is fairly top notch. Let's see. Another thing this show does really well is really nail its setting. I mean, this is an odd thing to praise a show for, but it's really good at giving you a perspective on the way things used to be versus the way things are in the show versus the way things are now. Because Clive Owen even says when he gives a eulogy at his friend's funeral, he says, 20 years ago, a man's life expectancy was 39. Now it's like 47 or something like that. So so there's that, but also there's the fact that despite the medical staff having a general understanding of human anatomy and surgical procedures, there's just the fact that they don't really have the resources or the convenience that they do today. Obviously, today medical procedures and hospitals and medicines have come a long way since 1900. So obviously, life expectancy is significantly higher than it was when this show takes place. But but yeah, seeing a lot of the methods that the doctors on this show use, and how they can be easily ruled as primitive nowadays. It was actually fairly interesting to see these doctors at work, seeing them use these very crude instruments to great effect, while at the same time never really acting like they don't know what they're doing, because they know what they're doing. They, like I said, they just don't have the technology or the resources that are available to them today. If they didn't know what they were doing, then they wouldn't have been able to increase the life expectancy of a person by like 10, 15 years in the last 20 years. So yeah, the show's really good at giving you a sense of perspective in terms of medical advancement. And another thing I really like about the show is the lead character, who is by no means your standard, typical, oh, I want to save everyone type of guy. I mean, he was always kind of throwing me for a loop in how he was reacting to people, how he was reacting to different situations, what the show revealed about him. Because when I first saw him, and when I first saw his attitude, and when I first heard him giving his speech, I said, okay, is this going to be some kind of Dr. Frankenstein type character who thinks he can play God and defeat death or whatever? But the thing is, he knows. What I've found interesting is that he knows very well that you can't defeat death. He knows that you cannot tame these forces of nature. You cannot overcome mountains. You cannot overcome rivers. But he believes in achieving every small victory that you can possibly get. I mean, in the case of the mountains, you can build railroads through the mountains. In the case of rivers, you can dam the rivers up and use them for their own purposes. When it comes to the medical field, you can actually, I mean, he takes pride, and he takes a sense of personal accomplishment, personal satisfaction whenever he can give even one more year of life to a patient. So I actually found that very interesting, and even in his initial hostility towards Dr. Edwards, I actually thought was handled very well, because again, he's not just your cardboard cutout racist character. His reluctance to hire Dr. Edwards doesn't really come from any personal grievance against him, or at least not that we can see, or at least that's not the primary reason. But instead, like I said, it just comes from from how you would look in comparison to your other colleagues, in comparison to other hospitals. Like I said, in that time, are people really going to want to be operated on by an African American, no matter what his qualifications are? In a time where the word Negro is still being bandied about like a common slur, so on that note, I actually thought it was very understandable. And in terms of direction, it definitely feels like a Steven Soderbergh project, because a lot of the time he just lets the scenes play without any music. During the operating scenes, in the hands of a lesser director, the operating scenes would have these very tense, very, very loud, very dramatic musical cues, but during the operating scenes here, it's completely silent. You just let the characters A, play off of each other, and B, try to save this patient. You don't really need anything more than that. I mean, the situation basically speaks for itself. I mean, all the tension you could possibly need is already there. You don't really have to add anything else. And I think in a lot of his movies, Steven Soderbergh really gets that. And again, that's what I really like about his direction. And And when he does incorporate music, it doesn't really feel intrusive. He's a very a lot of the times when he approaches scenes, he does it in a very subtle, very understated way, and that very much remains true here. So yeah, the Knick. This is better than. I was actually very surprised by this. I mean, and just a small compliment here. This does not really hold back anything in terms of visuals. I mean, not only does in the first shot do you see a full frontal nudity naked woman, albeit out of focus, but also just the operation scenes. I mean, they look appropriately gory. They don't really hold anything back in terms of how much blood would necessarily be in that scenario. So yeah, the Knick. This is better than either of the other two shows I've been watching this summer, the Bridge and the Strain. Not to say anything against those shows, but this is just on a whole nother level, I think. And I am very much looking forward to the next episode. Within 10 minutes of watching this, I was hooked. And please don't drop the ball. Although, it's Steven Soderbergh. Do you really think he'll drop the ball? I don't think so.